Welcome to Gay Men Going Deeper, a podcast by the Gay Men's Brotherhood that showcases raw and real conversations about personal development, mental health, and sexuality from an unapologetically gay perspective. I am your host, Matt Lansadell, and joining me today is Dr. Frank Anderson. Welcome.
Thank you so much. When I hear that description, I'm like, okay, I know where we're going. This is exactly what I did in my memoir. So I am ready to.
Amazing.
Some people are like, are any questions off limits? And I'm like, after you've read my memoir, no, there are not.
Yeah, I know. When we had our pre interview meeting, I was like, yeah, this is going to be a good fit. So excited about this.
Great.
For those of you who don't know, Dr. Anderson is a world-renowned trauma treatment expert, Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and psychotherapist. He is an acclaimed author of To Be Loved, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation, Transcending Trauma, and the co-author of Internal Family Systems Skills Training Manual. As a global speaker on the treatment of trauma and dissociation, he is passionate about teaching brain-based psychotherapy and integrating current neuroscience knowledge with the internal family systems, or IFS, model of therapy. Dr. Anderson believes that the traumatic events can have a lasting effect on the well-being and life of an individual, and that addressing these events will help lead people down a pathway of healing and forgiveness.
Mhm.
You're a perfect candidate for this podcast.
It's
What can I
great.
say?
It's great.
Yeah. I'm very honored that I get to spend an hour picking your brain. I know you have a lot of wisdom and you have a lot of experience, both as a gay man, but somebody that's struggled with trauma yourself personally and also professionally. This is your expertise. So we're very lucky today to be able to soak up some of your wisdom. And today we're going right to the heart of the matter. We're going to be talking about healing the trauma of growing up gay. This is a
Mhm.
significant trauma. A lot of people don't realize this. So I want to really just spend the next hour unpacking this. What does it look like? What is this trauma? What is attachment trauma? What is CPTSD? What is IFS, the model that you're using to help people heal trauma and teaching and educating around? So we got a lot of good stuff for you guys today. And I want to first start off because I watched your interview on Medline,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
your tagline is trauma blocks love and connection, and love and connection is what heals trauma.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so that's a phrase that I don't really quite take ownership of
Okay.
because when I was writing my second book, Transcending Trauma, it was kind of
Hmm.
during the pandemic. Right, go run. There you go. There you go. Right, go run. Right, go run. And every time I'd go for a run, I'd hear trauma blocks love, love heals trauma. Trauma blocks love, love heals trauma. It was like a message.
Yeah.
And as I'm writing through this whole book, I was like, yeah, that's exactly how it feels to me. Trauma blocks love. Trauma blocks our authentic self.
Yeah.
Trauma blocks who we are.
Yeah.
And if you've been in the world of healing as long as I have, like 1992, working with Bessel van der Kolk, but my whole career has been in trauma,
Hmm.
except for my whole life, right? It is really, when you boil it right down, love and connection that heals trauma. There's a
Yeah.
lot of different models. Everybody's got their wave their fingers, do the this, talk about parts. Like everybody's got a model,
Hmm.
but in when you boil it down to its core essence, it's actually love and connection that is
Yeah.
what heals. And
Yeah.
so it's this cycle that we're all in because I don't know anybody who doesn't have some form of trauma. I
Yeah.
just don't. Now, they're not
Exactly.
my friends. Like I just haven't met them, right? And so it's part of the human experience from my perspective. So the more trauma we have, the more we don't have access to who we really are,
Yeah.
right? And yes, growing up gay is a trauma, and it starts so early
I
before
know.
awareness,
Yeah.
even for parents,
Yeah.
well-intended parents say and do things in culture and society that are just normalized and homophobic.
Yeah.
And kids have no clue of their sexuality or orientation at a very early age, and they're just being themselves.
Yeah.
And you internalize those messages, you absorb them with no awareness.
Yeah.
So it is a trauma to grow up in the world, in
Yeah.
my perspective. Even with things as good as they are, it's still a problem. I'm sorry. Separate from being trans, being gay is still a trauma in my
Yeah.
experience and in the work that I do, and it personally as well as professionally.
Yeah. Yeah, the conversation we're having here is really about social conditioning, right? The way that we're
Yeah.
conditioned as humans, and we're conditioned by a heterosexual culture to be heterosexual. And when we divert from that norm, this really is the trauma, right?
I saw it so clearly with my kids when my kids were growing up. A different version. It wasn't about orientation, but my both my boys grow up with two dads, right? But the world they had to deal with from a. I remember my preschooler, my youngest in preschool, as like, honey, before you go to school, I want to talk about the fact that you have two dads. He's like, no, I don't.
Hmm.
I'm like, yes, you have two dads. He's like, no, I don't. I'm like, okay. And he was very indignant about it. It was really interesting. He was like 3 years old. And what he did, and it was shocking to me. He's like, I have a daddy who's a daddy who's a daddy and a papa who's a mama. That's what he did. He was like, took the messages and all that he saw in TV and culture and society,
Yeah.
and on his own little brain, on his own, figured out how am I going to fit my world into the world that we live in. And this
Wow.
is what he did. Like it was shot. It was like it just like that's the way his brain worked, right? He's like,
Hmm.
how do I make sense of what I'm living in and what the world is telling me I'm supposed to live in?
Yeah.
And so that was his experience as a little kid with two dads. It's the same thing as as a gay person. It's
Yeah.
like you met boys wear blue, girls wear pink, blah, blah, blah. All the things. All, Dora the Explorer. Like there's so many cartoons
I know.
that are just so there's no way to get around it.
Yeah.
And we internalize it and we have to make sense of it
Yeah.
because your parents don't tell you it too. Oh my gosh, if you're gay, blah 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 blah.
I
That's
wish.
what they do, right?
Yeah.
I found out the hard way,
Yeah.
honestly. If
Yeah.
you want to talk about that a little bit, because
Yeah.
what
Yeah. Well, I want to say one quick thing is
go
it's this
ahead.
whole notion of like being alone in this. Like, for some of us, I've interviewed a lot of people, and some people as young as 5 years old know that's their difference, that they're gay, something's up. And then we have to carry this alone. And it's this thing about diverting from the norm, but also then having to navigate this on our own from a young age. It's a young nervous system that has to carry the weight of this heaviness, right? So yeah, let's move into your story. I would love to hear a bit about.
Well, and that carrying it alone also automatically creates a false self.
Mhm.
You have to, you're carrying something, you're different, you don't understand it, and you have to be what the world wants and needs you to be in order to be loved.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're like, oh, I remember looking at my uncles, like, say that, do
Yeah.
that, be like this. So something's not right. I don't know what the hell it is.
Yeah.
And yet the world is telling me I'm supposed to be this way in order to get love and attention. So
Yeah.
we're good at creating like disconnect and creating a false self.
Yeah.
What you have to do.
Abermate says you're exchanging attachment for, or you're exchanging your authenticity for
For
attachment,
attachment.
essentially.
That's exactly right. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
a dear friend. I love Gabor, and he's
Yeah.
he's absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
It's even more profound and earlier for in the gay experience. Like if you have grown up in a dysfunctional family,
Yeah.
your parents aren't available, that's one thing. When in fact you're different and you feel something, but you have no clue, you
Hmm.
know. And it happens for kids at different ages. Like for me, I was just being me for like a while. I was like, I didn't know, like until you get hit with it,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's the TV show, whether it's the comment, boys don't do that, something hits you when you're like, oh, I'm wrong, right?
Yeah.
I'm wrong. And what hit me was when I was 6 years old. This is where my kind of story starts in this way because one day, six-year-old kid, I walk into my parents' bedroom and they're like, Frankie, you're not going to school today. I'm like, what? Why? I'm not sick. It's not a holiday. Like, why am I not going to school? And they're like, you're not going to school. And I'm like, okay, fine. We get dressed and they drive me downtown to the big hospital. I was like, oh crap.
Oh,
Like we didn't go to like I went downtown Chicago where the big buildings were, right? I lived in the Midwest in a suburb, and I'm like, something's really wrong with me, right? I had no clue what, because they didn't say anything. And then I had a day of psych testing. I didn't even know what the hell it was. And like, I'm going to a hospital, I'm drawing pictures, and I'm telling stories in this room with a stranger all day. It didn't make any sense to me at all. And then I was sent to therapy for 6 years.
Is
No
that
explanation.
conversion therapy? Is that what it?
It was a form of conversion therapy. Yeah.
Oh,
It was a form of conversion therapy. My mom will say that now, right? Being gay was a disorder back in the day.
yeah.
It was in the DSM and all the books and stuff. But I got caught playing with my cousin's Barbie playhouse in her basement.
Hmm.
That's what it was. And I remember like we're in the basement, all the cousins are playing, and I go into the back room and there's this Barbie playhouse. I was like, "Oh, look at the little toilet, look at the little bed." There was like miniature furniture. Do you know what I mean? And I thought that was kind of cool. And there was Barbies in there, and I thought they were kind of cool. And I heard, "Frankie, boys don't play with dolls." Like, I don't even know who the hell it was who ratted me out, but it was a problem. And that started this 6 year trajectory of me going to therapy once a week and being programmed. I was really programmed to learn how to be a boy. I had to play baseball. I had to do all this stuff. I couldn't play with girl toys. Like, it was really
Oh,
programming. And I suppressed so much of it. But the message was, you're wrong. And if you want to be loved, you better be different.
yeah.
So, and so I think all of us have something. You have to know when you're wrong.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
there's because I was really innocent. I was just curious,
Hmm.
right? And that was a moment for me that changed the trajectory of my life.
I bet. Yeah.
It really did. I married a woman. I, did guy things. I suppressed whoever I was or whatever I felt in a big way. I had that lesson early on.
Yeah.
You better change or you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This whole notion of like being wrong, it's just like it's the mantra of shame, right?
Right?
What's your
Yeah.
what was your relationship to shame at that time? And then how did you transcend that? I'm curious.
I didn't have any awareness of shame. I didn't have that, like it that but I like, you're wrong. Like, you are fucking wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it was like that. And what I had also was my dad was beating me up and yelling and screaming at me. I had verbal and physical abuse. So it just reinforced everything. So I
Mm.
had, the gay thing, and then my dad who was really out of control, physically and verbally abusive, and my mother who was super passive. Like, she needed him.
Yeah.
She would do everything in her power. Oh,
Mm.
Frankie, he loves you. Oh, Frankie, what are you talking about? That's not true. Because
Yeah.
my father, and she couldn't leave him. So it was this crazy combination for me of, like, I am wrong. That is clear. And I'm going to get killed for it if I
Yeah.
don't do something. And I'm stuck here because my mother will not do anything and my father won't change. So it was,
Yeah.
it was a really, it was a, I got so disconnected. Like, one of the things I talk about, which is shocking to me now in retrospect, when I was in fast forward, and go to college. That's was the thing. My saving grace was I was smart.
Mm.
I got A's. It's like, get A's, get stars on your report card, get A's. Like, that is what people want. I
Yeah.
sucked at baseball, boy. I really sucked at. I was like, there's like, who wants to be the catcher, right? In the baseball thing.
Yeah.
And I'll be the catcher. Like, it's got all this protective gear, right? Little did I know there was nobody else volunteered. I had to play every single game. I was the catcher the whole season. So it was so I was just hiding behind all the protective gear. I
Oh,
hated baseball, right? But I learned smart was good. Like, people like smart. So I
yeah.
just went to school, like, just crazy, crazy, crazy.
Yeah.
To get into Harvard is when
I was gonna say like that's
then, right? Yeah.
overachieving. Most
Over
of us as gay men, we know the relationship to
yeah,
perfectionism, overachieving, overcompensating for these
100%.
inadequacies or these shame-driven things
Yeah,
that we all
yeah.
experience.
Survival. It was survival. And
Yeah.
I kept thinking, if I get all A's, he'll love me. like my father. Like I was striving to like stay alive, but also to get love. That's why the name of the book is To Be Loved. It was like
Yeah.
my whole life was organized around to be loved because I
Yeah.
never felt loved. Like when you're not okay, you're wrong.
Yeah.
You've got to fix yourself and you don't feel loved authentically for who you are. Most of us don't,
Yeah.
all different reasons. We're left with insecurity and lack of feeling valuable and loved. And that was, boy, that was a story of my life
Hmm.
in a big, big way. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. It really was.
This, I want to repeat the tagline. Trauma blocks love and connection, and love and connection is what heals trauma. How on earth do we navigate that? Like I'm navigating my own journey. I was diagnosed with CPTSD like 3 years ago. It's been a very, very painful journey,
Yeah.
unpacking, disarming protector parts, going back to the scene of the crime, all the things, right? It's been very, very challenging.
Yep.
So what's that tipping point, right? It's like trauma blocks love and connection, but you
Yeah.
need to let love and connection in to heal the trauma. Like help me wrap my head around this one.
Help me, help me,
Help
help.
me.
So, and trauma blocks love, love heals trauma. I add the connection piece. I added the connection piece because
Okay.
originally, when you're blocked and there's no internal connection, when you have no access to your authenticity,
Hmm.
your truth of who you are, you need connection in order to start dismantling that system.
Hmm.
Okay, you
Yeah.
need outside someone who sees you, who loves you, who cares about you
Yeah.
in order to help soften the parts of you that are so tenaciously protecting you
Yeah.
and connecting you.
Yeah.
Is a relational component.
Yeah.
Am I seen? I remember my high school biology teacher saw me. She's like, "You are a special person." You know, I can
Hmm.
remember Miss James, right? Like you've got to have connections where people authentically see and love you for who you are. Sometimes that's in therapy,
Hmm.
sometimes it's in relationships, right? So
Yeah.
that starts softening those protectors enough for you to start loving yourself.
Yeah.
That's the so love and connection is not only between people, it's internal because
Yeah.
trauma blocks the internal connection between our head and our heart, between who we are
Yeah.
and what we deserve, right? So
Yeah.
there, in order to survive, like Gabor says, we have to disconnect.
Yeah.
So there's this internal disconnection, but you can't get there until there's enough loving connection in your life that softens those protective parts
Hmm.
enough to allow you to start repairing
Yeah.
and healing the trauma. Like my smart part was who I was. That
Yeah.
was me. And it took me a really long time to let that soften enough that it was like, oh, that's not my identity. It's just a part of me.
Yeah.
Right? I was in therapy in my residency at Harvard, 11 years, 5 times a week. I was in psychoanalysis and I never cried once.
Wow.
That is crazy to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy that I had a connection with my therapist. I was so connected to him. I had to see him no matter what. I would do anything like it was overly connected in a way, but
Yeah.
I still hadn't softened enough to have connection with myself. Like,
Yeah.
how do you go to therapy for? And he was a nice person. He was a good therapist, but I couldn't access me.
Yeah.
That's where I came out. It was during that process of being in therapy for 11 years that I finally busted through.
Yeah.
And at the end of that treatment came out. I was with a wife. I married my wife. She was a pediatrician. Like we were supposed to have kids, and there was something telling me I'm not having kids with this woman. Like, why the hell wouldn't you have kids with a pediatrician? But there's some part of me was like, this is not right.
Hmm.
This is not right. I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah. What did it take for you to break through till you could get to that place where you can start? It's almost like I can almost feel it, like the head, the heart, there's the
Yes,
severing, right? We
right.
have to retreat. We have to go into that
Yeah,
dissociative state because
yeah,
it's too painful to live in this
you got it.
broken-hearted place.
Yeah.
Like what helped you reconcile these two worlds?
Everybody's different. I'll say there's a different process for everyone. So you got to trust your own process.
Hmm.
I needed to acknowledge my trauma before I can connect to who I was.
Hmm.
That was my process. Some people need to connect with who they are before they can process my trauma. Like my husband's different.
Yeah.
Like came out, he had a suicide attempt at 18. He came out, lost his family, lost connection. He was grew up in a very fundamental, religious experience. He had to come out first, and he's still unpacking his trauma. Like it's
Yeah.
like come out first, trauma second. That's it was his order. My order was different. My parents were like, nothing's wrong, nothing's wrong. This is such a happy family. I needed to acknowledge what happened to me first before the layers in me softened enough to let me connect to who I was. That's why I came out. I was 32 years old before I came out. I was married to a woman for 8 years.
Hmm.
A totally disconnected life. And it was finally, I know what happened to me. It wasn't my fault. I'm not a
Hmm.
bad person. Bad things happened to me, not I'm a bad person. The
Yeah.
shame gets kind of like, oh, the people really distort what happened to me from who I am
Yeah.
because we take it out when perpetrators don't take responsibility for what they do, we take responsibility for what happened to us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so it was unfolding
Yeah.
that allowed me, it's like, oh, I'm not bad. It was what happened to me that was a problem, not I'm the problem. And then I was able to connect with authenticity. And it was this is another thing I'll tell you, Matt. Like we all choose the other to survive or to be liked and loved, right?
Yeah.
Like it's my mother over me because I needed to for survival. And most of my life, I chose other people over me
Same.
because I needed to, right? That's what we do. Like to be loved and to be liked. It's more about you than it is about me. And there's really been two points in my life. I'm working on a third one right now. I'll tell you 2 points in my life where I chose me over everyone else. And one was when I came out. I was like, because I kind of thought I'm going to lose everybody in my family. I grew up in a conservative Midwestern family. I'm going to lose everybody if I come out. And it got to a point, it was like, I don't care. I'm more important
Hmm.
than my family. And it was huge. And it was like it took me over. It was like a force of nature that took, like I couldn't stop it. I was cheating on my wife and going to cruising areas at the time. She was on call. I'd, go to cruising areas. I was living this crazy, horrible double life. I felt so bad about myself.
Hmm.
And I was, I can't do this anymore. I can't live this lie.
Yeah.
And kind of busted through. And I'm like, I'm choosing me. And it worked. It was like that was the first time in my life. Like it was a huge risk.
Wow.
Huge risk. I didn't talk to my parents for 7 years. 7 years, right? And I
Hmm.
didn't tell them I was out for 2 years. They didn't even know because I was living in Boston. They were in Chicago. I had no contact with them until I had the strength to tell them.
Yeah.
In time, honestly, in my life that I chose myself was writing this memoir because the memoir is very revealing
Hmm.
and it tells a lot about what actually happened.
Hmm.
My family does not want this out there. I'll tell you that,
Yeah.
And I said to my mom, it was a week before the book came out. I said, Mom, I'm really sorry. I love you. I care about you, but I'm telling my story. And my truth is more important than my relationship with you.
Hmm.
I'm sorry to say that.
Yeah.
I love you and I care about you. And if you never want to be in my life, that's a risk it's worth taking for me now
Hmm.
because I care about little Frankie
Yeah.
more than I care about you. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. And we're still repairing. Like this book came out in May. We're
Yeah.
still repairing that relationship. But those are the two times in my life I was like, because there's so much at stake, so much loss at stake to
Yeah.
choose. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. Choosing authenticity over connection.
Yeah,
That's truly choosing ourselves. And
right. That's
that's why I
right.
think I'm so in resonance with your work. When I
Yeah,
first read your book, Transcending Trauma, I was navigating, I was at the very beginning, that's why I bought it. I was navigating my own CPTSD. So I bought it for
yeah,
myself. And then
yeah,
I
yeah,
used it for client work. But
yeah,
and you shared your story so vulnerably in that book at the beginning, talking about how you had your own trauma, you were navigating even later into your career and doing
yes,
therapy with people, and you were still had unprocessed trauma. And I
yeah,
found myself relating, and I was like, wow, like I don't feel so alone or feel shame because I think
great.
we can take this on as therapists that we have to be perfect before we can do this
Right.
work. And
That's
it's
right.
not about that. It's an evolution, right? We're always evolving.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's better to be one step ahead, but oftentimes we're not. Let's be
exactly.
real. Like, let's be real, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
In medical school, they're like, see one, do one, teach one, and
yeah.
it's like that. It's kind of like that.
It
But
is. It is.
right. Yeah.
It's humanistic. We're all human. We're all
Yeah.
walking this path. Life is messy, right? We
Yeah.
can't clean it up, and the more we try and clean it up and pretend it's not there, the worse it becomes. And I think so. I applaud you and I honor you. I think that's so beautiful that you're choosing yourself. Yeah, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
inspiring.
And another thing that's become really important to me in this journey of choosing myself, and I'll talk about forgiveness also, like
Mm.
at some point, but choosing myself, I heard recently, love is not the highest vibration.
Mm.
Authenticity is.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was like, oh, let me learn more about it. Let me unpack that. And love is a vibration that includes only the positive.
Hmm.
Authenticity holds the range of
Yes.
all. It's the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And it is more elevated to hold the true range of every human being than to
Exactly.
just hold the positive. So that really
Huh.
affected. I was like, yeah, I feel that because one of the things that's been so important in my healing journey is acknowledging the ways that I have harmed and been harmed,
Yeah.
and acknowledging the ways my perpetrator, my father, and my mother have harmed and been harmed.
Hmm.
And it's until we really see the humanity in all of us, I don't think we can heal. Like in the States here, the political divide is ridiculous.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's crazy, but it's because we're holding on to what we think is good about ourselves and we're othering the other side.
Exactly.
We're
Yeah.
not holding both in everyone. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's a big deal for me to, and like I like talked about the ways I yelled at my kids, the way my father yelled at me. I was like, I really was like, I am not just a victim here.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, nobody is just a victim.
Yeah.
When we're when we're traumatized, we absorb perpetrator energy,
Yeah.
and we can perpetrate on ourselves
Yeah.
or on people. And I really feel, we've got to hold the range if we're going to heal truly. And that's people get pissed off at me when I'm like, you're forcing me to forgive. You're forcing me to forgive. I'm like, no, I'm not. It's a choice.
Hmm.
But you can forgive. You're actually freeing yourself up,
Yeah.
the other person, and you're not letting them off the hook.
Exactly. Yeah. We're all victims or we're all perpetrators throughout life. And I think that's the
Yes.
biggest, most humbling thing
right?
That's the empathy. I think it requires empathy and compassion to hold both.
Yes.
And
Right.
honestly, we could do a whole episode on how to
Yes.
do that and
Yes.
bring politics into it because that's if you're going to have a political or a religious conversation with somebody, you need that empathy and that compassion
Yeah.
and the curiosity to be able to go into that place.
I was recently on ABC News and I said something really bold, which I was really happy that I said it because it was right after the election here in the States. And I said both political parties have different ways to solve the same problem.
True.
And that both sides are actually being driven by their trauma.
Hmm.
And one side has this solution for their trauma, and another side has that solution. And all they keep doing is fighting over the solutions to the same problem.
Exactly.
I had this experience with my brother-in-law, who is super conservative. He's a big Trump person. He was at the insurrection at the Capitol, tearing down the thing, very proud of that, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, we're living in different camps, but he's been my brother for 21 years and never really talked to me for obvious reasons. When I wrote Transcending Trauma, I went to Chicago for the holidays, and I'm like, oh God, I have to talk to him. Like we're sitting him and I were the only one at the table, right? We're sitting talking. And he asked me about the book. He was doing the polite thing, and I started telling him about my trauma history and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, Frank, he's like, my father beat me up. And I was abused as a kid, and I thought it was normal. And you're doing some incredible stuff to help people. That's amazing. He's like, I go to the Catholic Church and I do my missionary stuff, but I give you a lot of credit. And I'm like, well, thank you, Bruno. I really appreciate that. Like, thank you. And he got up from the table and he said, could I get a copy of your book? And he hugged me for the first time. Like
Wow.
I've known him for over 20 years. And it was that joining in our trauma
Hmm.
that melted away our political differences. And we have a good relationship now.
Cool. I love
He
that.
still he still holds his political views, and so do I.
Yeah.
But that's not what actually connects us.
Yeah.
It's our wounding. It's the commonality of
Yeah.
our wounding, not the way we think we're supposed to solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's a lesson in looking for similarities instead of differences in
Yes,
people, and that's the answer really at the end of the day.
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah. Why do people feel politics so strongly? It's because it's personally relevant.
Yeah.
Like it's about our own pain.
Yeah.
It's about our soul, our morals, our views. That is rooted in our trauma.
Yeah.
It is.
That'd be an amazing, like, just even doing research on that,
Right?
like
Right?
politics and trauma and the
Yeah.
intersection of that.
I've
Wow, that'd be
really wanted
fascinating.
to, yeah, I wanted to write an article about it, and it was like I loved saying it on ABC News, like I'm like, to get it out there in that way because
Yeah.
it's something I've been holding for a while and
Yeah.
not said it so publicly before,
Yeah.
and people don't want to hear that. People are like, they're the enemy. Don't you understand? Look at how fucked up they are, And I'm like, well, if we actually look a little deeper,
Hmm.
we're fucked up too.
Yeah.
And sorry, we've got to admit that, like
Yeah.
when we can acknowledge the good and bad in us, we can acknowledge the good and bad in other people, or
Yeah.
vice versa, whatever order that needs to happen. And you know what I'll tell you, for me, Matt, like it's such a relief to be wrong now.
Yeah.
I love being wrong.
Yeah.
I don't have to be perfect anymore. And
Yeah.
I love apologizing. It's
Yeah.
like it's like so freeing. It's like my kids are like, you're blah 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I am so sorry. And
Yeah.
it's so disarming. They're so pissed at me. They wanna hate me because of whatever's going on, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. If
Mhm.
I did wrong, oh, so much better. I don't need to be perfect. And I screwed up. I'm so sorry. I don't even care what it is. If you
Yeah.
told me I did something wrong, I'm like, okay, honey, I am so sorry.
Yeah.
It's been so good. Because I'm not holding other people accountable for what they're doing because I've
Mhm.
forgiven them.
Yeah.
So I don't need to be held accountable
Yeah.
anymore because I could forgive myself.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I'll say probably one of the
Yeah.
biggest things I've learned in the last 3 years, or that how I've transformed. I'm not quite at the place where I'm letting love in freely and loving myself. It's coming. I can feel it. I'm
Yeah.
right around the corner from it, but
Yeah.
it's humility. Like
Mm,
humility, the protector part's
right.
disarming, meeting fear, meeting shame, meeting all these things, and just like, and just compassion for myself and humility. These are big, big like virtues that I'm learning right now. And I'm hearing that in
Beautiful.
you, like
Yeah.
just being able to apologize, being able to set yourself free from ego and egoic
Yeah.
tendencies. It's like,
Yeah.
that's humility from my perspective.
It's
Yeah.
a big relief. It's
Yeah.
been a big relief for me
Yeah.
because I
I bet.
needed to hold up this ridiculous standard to
Hmm.
compensate for the pain inside of being less than and wrong
Yeah.
and bad. It's just a natural compensation,
Yeah.
but it's at a huge cost.
Yeah. Big time. Big
Yeah.
time. Okay, I want you to put your doctor hat on now. I want the clinical side of you.
Okay.
I love this side, don't get me wrong. I love it. That's what this whole podcast is about. But I really want to I want the listener viewer to get some things, some tangible things. The interview that you did on Medline, like maybe I'll even tag that in because you gave some really good things there. And you know that you don't necessarily need therapy to heal
Yeah.
trauma and these sorts of things. So maybe can we just like unpack a little bit about like the trauma of growing up gay, attachment trauma, what is trauma? Like give the listener viewer like just a little snippet of like what this is. What are we working with here?
So trauma is one of these buzzwords before, like the baby boomers are like, I don't have trauma. Like the Gen Zs are like, I'm traumatized with everything. Like, it's different. Every generation holds
Yeah.
different things around trauma.
Yeah.
For me, I think about intensity, frequency, and duration,
Yeah.
right? How often, how frequent, how intense was whatever happened to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trauma is what happens to you, not who you are.
Yeah.
It's your response to the trauma that's an issue,
Yeah.
right?
The
It's
meaning we make of it.
the meaning we make of it, the effect it has on our body,
Hmm.
our thoughts, our feelings, and the behaviors that result.
Yeah.
Do I drink? Do I smoke? Do I need to be perfect? Do I over exercise? Do I need to have straight A's? Those are behaviors that are responses to trauma.
Okay.
PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, is a response to trauma.
Yeah.
So we have to separate what actually happened to me, what did I go through, what energy am I carrying because of what I go through, and then
Mhm.
what did I do with it, and how am I responding? And most people don't know that their perfectionism is related to their unresolved trauma.
Yeah.
Most people don't connect, right? Right? They don't. Most people don't know that drinking or hypersexuality is connected to their unresolved trauma because that's the behavior. And the
Yeah.
behavior is trying to keep the trauma away, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm always like, okay, let's parse out what are the behaviors you want to what are your problematic behaviors? And let's track those back to the origin of why they started and why they were needed and what's adaptive about them, which
Yeah.
gets to what happened to me because a part inside carries what happens to me is very different than the parts that are trying to react and respond to it. So we
Yeah.
have to separate that out. And I
Yeah.
think it's important for people to know, like my list of various types of trauma keeps growing, growing, growing. Like
Yeah.
single incident trauma,
Yeah.
chronic trauma, complex PTSD, or ongoing relational trauma growing up in a dysfunctional family or environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Family legacy trauma, the trauma that you get by being born in the family that you were in, often includes ethnic issues, whether you're Jewish or Italian or whatever
Yeah.
ethnicity you are.
Yeah.
Institutional trauma, being
Yeah.
bullied in school or in medical trauma in hospitals. There's institutional trauma.
Religious trauma. Yeah.
religious trauma, cultural trauma. There's so many different ways we are affected by
Hmm.
what happens to us in the environment that we grow up in.
Yeah.
And global trauma, obviously the pandemic that we all experience, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack. All traumas are not created equal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm like excited talking about this. I love talking about this stuff. Not many people are get jazzed by
Right?
shame and trauma talking about these
Right.
things, but I'm so fascinated by it. And so where do you lump in the trauma of growing up gay into those
It's
categories?
developmental trauma. I would say it's developmental attachment trauma. Developmental trauma is a form of complex relational trauma.
That's what I thought, yeah.
It's a form of it. Like at what developmental stage did your trauma occur?
Hmm.
Right. And when you're growing up gay, you have this experience of being wrong, less than, inadequate, broken,
Yeah.
various different developmental stages.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's really developmental trauma.
Yeah.
It's often, it can be attachment trauma. Like attachment trauma is different than developmental trauma too. Attachment trauma is what happens very early on in the bonding experiences with your primary caregivers within the first 2 years of life.
Yeah.
And a lot of attachment trauma is pre-verbal. Like
Mm.
people store it in their body, they don't have words for it. Like one of the things that happened to me that I understood many, many years later was my abuse started in the crib. I started getting hit in the crib as a baby. My dad was in pharmacy school. He was totally out of control. When I would cry as a baby and my mom was working, he'd hit me.
Oh,
So
no.
I have pre-verbal attachment trauma also, which wasn't about being gay at all. It was because I was a baby who was crying and hungry. You know what I mean? So it's a different level of trauma in that also.
Yeah.
So there is those early, like when you grow up with a father who's an alcoholic and not available, a mother who's depressed and suicidal, and all the ways our parents, you grow up with 10 kids in the family and you're neglected by sheer number
Hmm.
early, where you're not getting your basic needs met as a very early infant before you have words.
Yeah.
So you encode it in your body or in emotion.
Okay. Yeah.
And those can be healed too.
Yeah.
Those can be healed too. It's just you don't get to those through words.
They show up more like somatic memories. Like you can have
Totally.
feelings of like not feeling safe or feeling wrong. You're not even doing anything.
Yeah.
It's like I've had this before. Somatic memories, they come on very intensely and it's like I don't know why. Suddenly I'm just feeling anxious, right? And
Okay.
it's like nothing happened. So
Or desperately needing someone else to feel good, to feel safe. This
yeah,
is why I pick crappy partners over and over again.
yeah,
I
yeah.
keep, attracting unavailable men. It's because my attachment trauma is not conscious, it's pre-verbal,
Yeah,
and there's this desire to fix it,
yeah,
but we keep repeating it because we don't have awareness of it.
yeah. Okay, so what is a trauma past 2 years? If it's attachment pre 2 years, what would it be? Relational and developmental beyond that, or is it still
Yeah,
attachment trauma?
yeah, it's non-attachment trauma typically after the first 2 years. I mean, these are
Okay.
the guidelines. And I tend to break down some of us do. Bessel van der Kolk breaks it down too. Like there's relational trauma in childhood, growing up in a dysfunctional family. You know, the ACE study,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
that Bessel calls developmental trauma disorder.
Okay, yeah,
It's basically relational trauma, complex PTSD in childhood
yeah,
versus relational trauma in adulthood, complex PTSD. We don't call it developmental trauma as much, even though a lot of people who are adults who have complex PTSD have early relational developmental trauma. Does
okay.
that make sense? So you're
Yeah,
an adult and you can have messed up relationships and
yeah,
complex PTSD, and you have all these symptoms, and you drink too much or you're
yeah,
dissociated. And it's often rooted in unresolved complex trauma in childhood
yeah,
that you
yeah,
didn't work on versus kids who are being traumatized get developmental trauma disorder, which is relational trauma, when you're a kid in childhood.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
they're similar, it's along the continuum, but we do kind of talk about them slightly differently.
Yeah. I think there is a lot of unprocessed and unhealed complex trauma in the gay community. That's my
Uh,
hunch. As soon as CPTSD gets recognized and put into the DSM, I bet you we're going to see a
yeah,
skyrocket of diagnoses in the gay community because
yeah,
it's so prevalent. Like I see it like
yes.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's, well, you're making me think, we've got a lot of dysfunction in our community. I mean, in some ways, we're more self-aware than the average person because in order to come out, you have to be self-aware.
Yeah.
And in other
Yeah.
ways, we have such deep-seated inadequacies,
Yeah.
the pre-verbal wrongness that we've encoded. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
The way, the super healthy, fit gay community is a big compensation for the
Yeah.
AIDS crisis. I was there, I remember this happening. And all
Yeah.
these people started getting super buffed in compensation for everybody dying all around us. Like it was really, really powerful. There was, it's popping in my head. It was so crazy. I don't even know if you remember this. You're probably too young to remember this, but there were these potato chips that were certain kind of potato chips made with a certain kind of oil. They were fat-free potato chips. They were made with oleic acid or something like this.
Okay.
They were fucking rampant in the gay community. Everybody was like, oh my, like, and all we'd go out to dinner and people would talk about eating bags of fat-free potato chips. But what ended up happening, why it was so rampant in the gay community, is they caused explosive diarrhea. Okay. And so everybody's like, I could eat a bag of potato chips, shit my brains out, and not gain any weight. Right. It was
Oh,
so
good.
pathetic. And I was like, we are broken that we
Yeah.
care so much
Yeah.
about being thin and pretty that we're going to eat potato chips that give us diarrhea
Yeah.
and excited about it. It was very painful. Like
Yeah.
I an HIV inpatient, a day treatment program, and they would not, the participants would not go to an eating group,
Yeah.
didn't want to talk about their eating issues because everybody had an eating disorder.
Yeah.
To
Mm.
be thin and pretty and perfect and desirable and wanted.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
so we have a lot
I
of
know.
dysfunction in our community. We're
Yeah.
also healthy too, like
Yeah.
both. It's both, but it makes me sad.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that haven't been able to work through the trauma that you're talking about.
I know. And that was my inspiration of having you on the podcast. And we've done 220 episodes now. I would say probably 15 or 20 of mine are around trauma healing. So I'm
Yes,
really devoted my life and my career to helping gay men
great.
move beyond this trauma. And I'm
Yeah,
like, so you have an amazing tool in your toolbox. You've dedicated your life to a
yeah.
modality, internal family systems work. I've used it. I use it in
Mhm.
my private practice. I've used it in my own healing journey. It's amazing. So can you share a bit about that and introduce the audience to this and why this could help them get away and heal trauma? Yeah.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I was in therapy for 11 years, 5 times a week, which was more like psychoanalytic therapy.
Hmm.
It let me understand everything, but it didn't get to the core healing of my wounding. It
Hmm.
didn't. There are certain trauma treatments. Trauma is a specialized form of treatment. Going to therapy and talking to a therapist is not going to help heal your trauma. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm going to make a bold statement, but
Yeah.
it does. You need to access these things that are unconscious and deeply held within your body
Totally.
and pushed away.
Yeah.
And EMDR is one of such treatment, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Any somatic type of treatment, somatic experiencing or sensory motor psychotherapy, where you work on physical body sensations to help access the trauma that we store in our body,
Hmm.
and internal family systems, which is a form of therapy that works with the different parts of our personality or aspects of us. And
Hmm.
IFS believes we have different parts or aspects of our personality. Some of them carry the pain of trauma, and others are protective in nature and work really hard to keep the pain of trauma away. And there's
Yes.
a process in appreciating the protectors and getting to know them, not hating them and getting rid of them, that opens the door to allow us to access the pain of our trauma from a place of what IFS calls self-energy,
Yeah.
which is internal wisdom, intuition, our soul, right?
Yeah.
There's a way we can release trauma, not just live with it. One of the things I'm doing, because I created the trauma curriculum for the internal family systems module. I wrote the book on trauma, and I'm creating a program for the general public. Like that is just signed a contract for the next book. Oh, here we go again, round 4, to bring trauma healing to the general public, because I want people to learn how to do this
Cool. Yeah.
outside of therapy also. Not everybody has access to therapy, and there's not enough therapists to heal all the trauma in the world,
Seriously. Like,
right? So
yeah.
I'm doing what I can to kind of bring it to a larger audience, but I will use these principles, you know, of what I learned over the years.
Yeah. Okay, this is good. We're getting into the meat of it. So I'm curious, what are some of the parts gay men have to develop to not have to be with the pain?
Yeah.
What are the
So
parts?
the one is, so I would say a ubiquitous, a part that all gay men hold is shame. Like, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm no good. That's a wound,
Hmm.
right? That's a wound. And everybody has that false self.
Would you call
Uh,
that like the ego?
uh,
Like, are these parts like built within the structure of the ego? Like they're like these parts we develop to keep ourselves
yeah,
safe.
they're kind of more connected to the ego, but they're also super ego related too,
Okay.
because we all have a critic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Critic is more super, is critic is internalized perpetrator, or super ego energy,
Hmm.
right? And so I would say all gay men have some form of a critic, because you're needing to use that energy that you absorbed. You're bad and you're wrong, but you need to use it internally protectively. Like, if you were thin and pretty, then we'd be better. If we were smart. So we become critical of ourselves
Yeah.
in the service of not getting hurt anymore.
Yeah. Exactly.
You
To
know
try
what I
and
mean?
motivate ourselves to go to the gym, to
Yeah, that's exactly
get your
right.
master's and your doctorate and all these
Yeah,
things,
but
right?
it's
Yeah.
it's a self-critic in the service of making things better, so you don't get hurt anymore. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Okay.
So I think all gay men have some form of critic. I think we have a false self. We've created this persona. There's such a, it's so, there's a fake inauthenticity. It's like there's an inauthentic. I think about. Sorry to say this. Oh my God. I'm talking about myself here. I'm talking about me, everyone.
I know what you're gonna say.
You go to Taylor Swift concert, or you go to see Wicked the movie, and there's like all these teenage girls and gay men, right?
Yeah.
And we all have this, like this, as if this
Mhm.
elevated inauthenticity.
Yeah.
It's us
Playing
in
the
the
role. It's the role that we're taught.
playing the role,
Yeah.
playing role. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And it's very powerful. You
Yeah.
know, I'm so great. I've been with my husband for 25 years. We're going on. I'm so grateful to have such a healing relationship for myself. But I have friends that have been in long-term relationship and then get out of them, and I'm like, oh, to have to date in this time, day and age, with all the apps, to find authenticity is like finding a needle in a haystack,
Yeah.
because there's such layers and layers and layers, barrier,
Yeah.
armor, and
Totally.
I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I don't want to be the Debbie Downer that's like, oh, there's no authentic men in the world, because I don't believe that. It's kind of like, the more you heal, the more your energy elevates, and the more you're capable of attracting a similar energy.
Yeah.
The reason there's so many unavailable guys out there is because your energy is blocking your authentic self.
Totally. Yeah.
That's what it is. The more we elevate, the more layers we clear, the
Yeah.
more we attract that vibration.
Yeah.
I don't like, there's a lot of people like, oh my God, poor me, this is such a sick community. Yeah, we are sick. That is a sick community. And
Yeah.
there are people that are doing their work, and you
Yeah.
can find them if you do your work.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
collective. It's a
Yeah.
collective.
I like using the like the four trauma responses as a way to help people identify protector parts because I
Mhm.
know for me, you got fight, fight, freeze, and fawn. Fawning was my in earlier development. I
Hold
fawned a
on.
lot.
I'm going to stop you. You're going to not like this.
Okay.
Fawn is not a trauma response.
Oh, interesting. Okay, tell me more
I
about
know.
that.
I know. I'm sorry. I sorry for stopping you. I wrote an article in Oprah Daily Magazine about this, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
here we go. I'm going to get myself in trouble. Fawn is a protective mechanism, but it's not a trauma response.
Okay.
Social media, popular culture has thrown fawn around as if it's a thing in the trauma response, and it's not. I'm not saying people don't fawn to protect themselves.
Yeah, so it's a protector part, not a trauma
It's a
response, is what
it's
you're
a
saying.
protective
Okay.
part, not a trauma response. Yes, I'm not saying fawn doesn't exist.
Yeah,
Shit,
yeah.
I've been fawning for a lot of lifetime. You know what I mean?
Ditto.
We
Yeah.
all do, right? But fight, flight, freeze, submit is a trauma response.
Okay.
Fight or flight,
Uh,
freezing and submitting.
yeah.
It's hyperarousal. It's the freeze is a transition zone because you're frozen, but you're activated.
Yeah.
And then submit is dissociation or playing dead because
Uh,
that is the way, like if I play dead, that's the ultimate in my survival tactic. So I always want to like tell people accurately and authentically what we're talking about. Fawning
yeah.
exists. It's not a survival mechanism,
Okay.
even though it can feel like that. It's a protective mechanism.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But those
Yeah.
you talked about are survival strategies that we all have.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for correcting that because I did
Yeah.
not know that.
And most people don't. And like, really, social media is loaded. I'm like, fawn, 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 fawn. Like, that's another article I got to write. Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
did. It's like, fawn, don't throw that around like that.
And I think people just identify with it because they identify with
Right?
pleasing. I think that's like the number one thing I see in my private
Right.
work is people are like, why, how can I overcome my people pleasing?
Yeah,
Right. And
exactly.
yeah,
Huge. It's huge.
yeah,
It's a big
yeah,
deal. I'm not minimizing that's what I would, that's the people pleasing is the opposite of authenticity.
yeah, yeah,
It really is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think other big ones that we see in our community is like hypersexuality,
Hmm.
masculinity, like hypermasculinity,
Yeah.
this like callous, like, fuck straight people.
Yeah.
You got this like real like kind of attitude is
Yeah.
a protector part, like the tough kind of inner
Yeah.
um yeah, like callous. I
And
think callous is a good way to look at it. But
you, you
yeah,
know
go
what
ahead.
else I want that really kind of makes me sad is the judging each other.
Yeah, oh for
A
sure.
very catty community.
Yeah,
And it's this way that we've been exiled and judged from culture. And now we're going to do that to each other.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? So
I
there's a way,
do. Yeah.
there's a way that, haven't we been through enough? Why are we judging each other so harshly?
Hmm.
Because there's a lot of comparing and competition within
Yeah.
the community that I think is sad, you
Yeah.
know?
When I first start connecting with gay men, even like collaboratively, it's
Yeah.
really interesting, like in this work, because I talk to so many people a lot, but it's like you first come into contact and it's like walls are up
Yeah.
immediately. Like there's very
Yeah.
few gay men that I've connected with where there's
Yeah.
just they're soft and they're gentle and
Yeah.
it's, you know, there's always
Yeah.
this like kind of
Right.
defensive, ready to fight kind of energy. And it's yeah, which it perpetuates our trauma. And I think we need to be very mindful of that. And
It's a sign for me of a lack of integration
yeah,
because the reality is we're more mixed than most.
yeah.
We have as gay men and lesbian women, we have more mixture of male and female energy
Hmm.
than cis people do. And so if we're presenting with one side, that's because we're not integrated in holding the other side.
I love that. That's a great perspective, in my opinion.
Right?
Yeah.
So any of those any of that outward expression is a lack of integration of the other side.
Yeah.
People ask me my pronouns sometimes, and I'm not a they person. Like it just doesn't work for me as a they, because we're talking about gender versus orientation. I like he, she, him.
Hmm.
I'm kind of 1/3 female and I'm 2/3 male.
I
And
love that actually.
that feels integrated for me. It embraces my femininity and it embraces my masculinity. And that's the percentage that feels kind of accurate for me. He, she,
Yeah.
him. And I think we need to hold both because we're both.
Yeah. I'm not a big pronoun guy. I've never used them, but you
Yeah.
just kind of slightly sold me on like, okay, that kind of makes sense for me too, because I think I'm that balance, and I'm very much about honoring my femininity and
Yeah.
these more yin qualities in me, which I'm
Yeah.
actually very yin because the work I do, I'm highly compassionate, I'm empathetic and nurturing and these
Yeah.
sorts of things. So I have these qualities in me. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that pronouns are complicated and, like that I don't know that we don't have one that works for everybody,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's important that it's not as much about the pronouns as much about the authentically integrating the range of you
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how do you represent that?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay, how can we begin to disarm these parts? I think that's the work, really. Like the work beyond disarming the parts is when you can start to feel the love and connection. And you also, well, I'll speak for myself, I also feel more fear. Once the protector parts have been
Right.
disarmed, I'm left vulnerable and I'm like, whoa, right? So there's this right now, I'm at this point where it's like I've stripped away a lot of my protector parts and I'm just naked and I'm feeling very raw. I'm feeling very vulnerable. I don't want to be visible very often. So I'm kind
Absolutely.
of now I'm like learning how to let love in so I can start to like learn to love myself again more deeply.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's not disarming protectors. That's what I'll say. It
Okay.
shouldn't be disarming them. It should be appreciating and loving them for the ways they've been helping you.
Okay. Good reframe. I love that.
Yeah, it's like, thank you so much, perfection, for the way you saved my life. Thank you, people pleasing part. You've got to learn to appreciate the value in them
Okay.
in order for you to not feel the fear.
Okay.
Because fear is, like it's more about, ugh, like my smart part, like, oh my goodness, like I was only smart, like that was it. That's all I had. And when I really embraced him, that part of me, for the ways he saved my life, got me out of that house, um, I started and loved him for the ways he was helping me, not disarming him or getting rid of him. Then I'm like, oh, I have a broader range in here. I'm actually funny too. And I'm this and I'm that. So the the embracing the positive intention of your parts allows for more space inside.
Hmm.
And you shouldn't really go to the vulnerability until you get permission,
Okay.
right? And the permission is like, do my parts know me outside of my protectors?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a you in there that is loving and compassionate and kind. And that's the you that you want to get in connection with the parts that hold the pain.
Yeah.
Okay, so once your protectors relax, one of the things that I teach in my trauma training that the IFS Institute doesn't teach so much is you have to repair the relationship between yourself and your protectors.
Hmm.
You have to repair that relationship. They have to know you and love you. You have to know them and love them
Okay.
in order for the next layer to occur, which is for yourself to be with the parts that hold the trauma. So
Okay.
there's a repair that needs to happen first
Yeah.
before you can go to that deeper layer.
Okay. This is so good. I'm loving this. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to my therapist next
Yeah.
week. So I'm like, this
Right.
is good
Yeah.
stuff. Uh, okay, we got about 10 minutes and we'll kind of start landing the plane. What else? What else is really important to know? Like, I want to just give the floor to you. Like, we've got healing trauma, the four T's of healing trauma. We could talk about forgiveness. Anything else that's required to heal?
Let's talk, yeah, so what I would like to talk about next, really, because we talked a little bit about forgiveness. So, but what I'd like to talk about is the process of healing,
Okay.
because this is
Yeah.
the thing that people really don't understand. There's so many therapies that don't really do healing. One of the things I'm working on in this new program that I'm talking about, I want to call it release, a fusion between psychotherapy, neuroscience, and coaching.
Cool.
Okay. Because I really believe that coaching, psychotherapy, and neuroscience all have things to offer, but we need to put them all together.
Yeah.
And the release piece is really important because a lot of people don't release the trauma they carry,
Yeah, exactly.
manage it, they do all the kinds of things with it instead of release it. And there's science that supports and backs releasing the energy of trauma. And there are three main steps involved in releasing the trauma. First is, and this is after, by the way, thanking your trauma response and appreciating the
Okay.
value of those protectors
Okay.
and accessing your wisdom, that self energy within you, that internal wisdom. So those are the first two steps in the T's.
Okay. Yeah.
The healing piece is the part that holds the trauma needs to share its experience.
Okay.
It's the only holder of the experience, and it's going to hold it forever
Hmm.
unless it shares it. Now, it could be shared with a therapist, it could be shared with the self now. So it can be shared internally or could be shared relationally.
Hmm.
But it's not just a story, it's the thoughts, the feelings, and the physical sensations. Like the experience needs to be shared. Like, does somebody else truly get it? That's a first necessary step in healing
Yeah.
because the heart's going to hold it forever until it knows it doesn't have to. And it may say, I don't have to hold this anymore because Frank gets it now. He
Hmm.
really gets what I went through. So
Yeah.
that sharing is really important.
Mm.
The second step is having a corrective experience,
Yeah.
the opposite of what the trauma is.
Yeah.
So if I feel shamed, I want to feel seen and known. If I
Mm.
feel unloved, the part that holds the trauma needs to feel loved.
Yeah.
If I feel neglected, I need to feel valued. So
Mm.
the part that holds the trauma after it shares what it holds, there needs to be a corrective experience. Neuroscience calls it disconfirming,
Yeah.
the opposite of what the part holds. And it
Cool.
needs to feel that. Then release is possible. Then release is possible. So then the part can let go of the thoughts, the feelings, and the physical sensation. It doesn't have to carry it anymore. It
Yeah.
shared it and it got what it needed. So
Yeah.
that's how it can be released. And I really want people to know that that's possible. Release is possible. And that's what I want to teach people. And that's what I do. It's not just managing it or processing it,
Yeah.
it's releasing it and no longer holding it. Like I this always comes up, and I'll bring it up this time, but it comes up a lot. I'm 61. Okay. And I don't look 61. Like I know I don't look
I was like
61.
45
Right?
at
People are
most.
like, and to tell you the truth, what's your skincare? Blah, 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 that kind of bullshit. It's not my skincare, it's my healing.
Yeah.
I
Amen.
really feel that the more I have released, the younger I look. It's
Wow.
not because I eat clean and, you know, use good skin products. Yeah, that helps, or I have good genes. But I really feel I'm lighter and cleaner and clearer because I've released so much of my trauma. And I think that's why I have a youthful
Mm.
look and energy.
Yeah.
Because the trauma blocks love, that trauma energy weighs us down and takes a toll on us.
Yeah.
And the more we can release, the more authentically energized we can be.
Yeah.
And I want people to know that that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so one last question before we
Yep.
wrap up is how can
Yep.
people do this that can't afford therapy? Like, let's bring it back full circle. Because if someone's like, okay, I got to do all these things, step one, step two, step three, how do I release it? How do I work with my parts? What's something that somebody can do? Where can somebody start if they are recognizing from this video or audio that they have trauma that they need to work on? Where's the best place to start?
I'm gonna say partly I want to say hold your breath. I'm gonna have another book out soon.
Okay.
But other than that, oh great. What the hell is that gonna do? No, this is one of the things that is good about what's happening in social media right now. There is a lot of access to a lot of different things. Go to
Yeah.
my website, sign up for my email list. I do courses all the time.
Yeah.
That's one of the good things about what's happening is that there's much more access to things.
Yeah.
Now you have to be discerning and you have to use your judgment. Like one of the big things in this new model of therapy that I'm creating for the general public is you take charge of your own healing journey,
Yeah.
not giving it over to a therapist or a coach.
Yeah. Which is empowering in
You,
my opinion.
right? You lost, people with trauma histories lose agency. Trauma is a violation of your wisdom in yourself.
Yeah.
So you have to take that back. Start trusting yourself.
Hmm.
Journaling is really powerful.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a journaling component in my kind of self healing
Yeah.
program because journaling is where your parts communicate. It's one of the ways they communicate.
Yeah.
Because you're writing, and all of a sudden you're like, this is not me. It's just flowing through me.
Yeah.
So journaling is a really good way.
Yeah.
Like I personally, it's like self-connection, self-awareness. You have to start with self-connection and self-awareness. What
Yeah.
are the ways that you can be with yourself? Because we're so on our phones, we're
Yeah.
so out
Yeah.
instead of in. For me, I go running in nature with music. That is my zone.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of work done separate from my own. I go to therapy still now. I'll be always in therapy. But
Yeah. Yeah.
there's ways that you can do some of this stuff on your own
Yeah.
too. And again, I'm really working on a program. It'll be out before the book comes out. I'm going to do online programs to exactly what you're saying. If you don't have the resources, there are ways to start doing this stuff. I'm doing a course in January called Write to Heal, WRITE.
Oh, cool.
So that people can learn. I got a whole protocol of how to
Yeah.
write, not just random shit writing, like writing with a purpose, so
Yeah.
that you can kind of do some of that work. I'm doing another course that's like body centered, like embodying the parts with your postures. Like, what does your angry part look like in your body? Let it show you.
Yeah.
What does anger look like? You know what I mean? And so the people start getting connected to these parts of them in a felt sense kind of way.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So there's a
Yeah.
there's a lot out there if you
Yeah.
start looking. And this
Cool.
is one of the resources, obviously. So thank you for
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. I'll make sure to link your website. So frankandersonmd.com.
Yeah.
I'll leave the audience with a tip that I have and I use with myself and my clients is one of the most popular trauma responses, in my opinion, is busyness. Busy, busy, busy. And I always say, slow down by 10%. That's the first session when I have clients, slow down by 10%, chew slower, walk slower, just slow down because you can connect to your body. The body operates much slower than the mind. So we want to start to slow down so we can connect somatically. And I think that's the entrance point to all healing. Presence is really the foundation of all healing, in my opinion. So
I love that. I think
yeah,
it's great advice. I'm constant anybody that I'm teaching how to do IFS, I'm like, slow it down, slow it down, slow it down.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So much gratitude. Thank you so much for spending over an hour with us and showering us with your wisdom and your personal anecdotes and being vulnerable and open with us today. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for all that you're doing in the world, because getting this stuff out there is really important. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah, thank you. And for those of you who are listening or watching on YouTube, drop some comments down below. I'll make sure that they can get to Frank if he wants to answer them there. And let us know about your trauma healing journey. Where are you at in your journey? What are you needing support with? Let's get the conversation happening down in the chat. And we'll see you all for the next episode. Much love.